dictated by our government grant. Tonight we're going to have to confront those two most important questions of our day. Well, hell, of almost any day, but especially today. More important, are all gods keeping kosher? And why are the single shoes in the road increasingly those of women? We'll get to that in a minute, but if you recall the sorts of things we were talking about how collective thinking, the ordinary workings of the human nervous system at which it speaks, is always based upon a point of view, and a point of view having nothing to do with any sort of judgment and having nothing to do with ordinary prejudice, bias, etc. It is simply that there must be a point of view. That is, there must be two words. That is, they must in some way be comparable. They can't be the same word. And then the nervous system can operate in the same way that AC current can work, as long as you've got an A, that's right, and a C. If the current goes out and does not come back, do not wait for your toast to brown. Not unless you have a long time, such as it becomes dark, I assume, from age. But how in the collective sense, that is ordinary thinking, that in the individuals there must be a point of view for the human nervous system to begin to think, for it to physically operate. And the points of view then, outside what appears to be the specific individual operation, then collectively that point of view must be in conflict with other points of view. That's the way any particular thought, idea, philosophy, whatever it is, that's the way it survives. For those of you who enjoyed Kyroots' somewhat raking of a well-known Greek philosopher, that his retelling of it was, give me a conflict wide enough, remember, not a seesaw, not a log long enough. I guess me trying to refresh your memory is not going to help if you do. The points of view then must be in conflict for the collective thought, whatever it is, to survive. It must be in conflict. That is the health of the secondary world. And this is beyond the old idea of the survival of the fittest at the primary world, as we've been calling it. It is not simply the physical combat that may the strongest survive, which is always neat for someone to say, may the strongest survive, because that's never anyone. You're back to the man who asked Kyroot, why was it that it seemed to him easier to poke fun at intellectuals than it was athletes? And Kyroots pointed out that, sir, not only is it easier, it's safer. Which I can assure the kind of man who would have written such a letter did not need that pointed out. But so we're not simply back to the old primary survival of the fittest. It is now in the secondary world, which is not growth of it, that for ideas to survive, there is a kind of combat, but not in some purely metaphorical sense, because the survival of the best idea has nothing to do with the judgment of it being best. It is simply the conflict of differing points of view. And it's only the ordinary who then, from their own point of view, decide, well, wait a minute, the good ideas won. Or my ideas, which of course are synonymous with the good ideas, seem to be in at least temporary retreat. It doesn't matter from a more complex view. It is simply that there is going to be conflict, or any idea, anything in the secondary world will not survive. The same way as humans, ideas must have apparent opponents. They must have the apparent opposition of some conflict to survive. And once you see that, then you see it's not only a matter of survival, it is a matter of health. Which is why there is a certain kind of stagnation from even ordinary views sometimes of old ideas, whether it be an old idea from a particular point of view of last week or 2,000 years ago. And it, of course, manifests itself in a slightly different way, springing a little more directly from alive hormones of that kind of thing of each new generation, looking at the last generation's ideas and thinking, Jesus, go away, straighten up, get help. So we were talking about that, and we were also talking about how ordinary thought, ordinary speech, ordinary attention normally and properly is operating at less than potentially maximum efficiency, or at least operating less than is maximally possible. And that's about where we were. And we've run out of time again. Well, now we have a few. I was going to suggest that we back up and pick up a Kyroot from a night or so ago. That said, that collective thought / truth / wisdom is to the individual version as the secondary would be to the primary. I know that several people must be tempted to say that is so self-evident that we should press on. The cows are getting restless, getting close to sundown. It is connected to this, and I was simply going to suggest one more little way to look at it. Considering the two realms of the secondary and the primary, and then considering the matter of collective thought and the individual version, and how the collective thought could be to the individual version as the secondary is to the primary, is note in those two realms, though, you have the absolutely inescapable necessity of the primary world. You then have what is near, what is now near, that same kind of de rigueur for the secondary. Except what? Even if you get some glimpse of that, even if some ordinary person were listening to this and took enough effort to say, well, I've got a general idea what you mean by the secondary and the primary. And if they find it interesting for a few minutes. What the ordinary mind would not continue to grasp, even if I pointed it out, or even if they saw it, it's not that hard, well, yeah, is that the secondary not only is now to the point of being near the same level of inescapability, in the sense that speech is now, in a quite real sense, at the same kind of S level as sex, sustenance, and shelter, like the good old primary requirements just to keep the human organism alive. But what it cannot conceive of is even when something becomes a near parallel necessity, like the secondary world, man's intellectual world, to everything else, is that the latter is an outgrowth at all times from the former. There is nothing within the structure of a polarized running of any machinery in a three-dimensional world, and of course we're referring to this, that can take that into account, because the closest you can come to taking anything into account is all ideas as reflected even by the language of the sequential movement of time. That is, one thing's got to follow another, that one thing caused something, one thing must have caused something. That was another Kyroot tonight, if you didn't particularly care for it, was that in giving a hint to a local god he had just appointed, one reality said, look, if you'll tell the creatures, if you'll predict to them what time the trains are probably going to run, they'll quit asking you what makes them run. For those of you who were at one time rabbinical scholars or theologians under the cover, there it is. Not just religions, but philosophies, common sense. That is the kind of common sense that is operational when the mind is run by polarized energy, which ordinarily it has to be. Is that you don't have to use words like sequence, and it's not a philosophical matter, not in some academic sense, but it's just obvious. There is no other way to look through polarized eyes and see anything other than, well, wait a minute, the man called me I don't want to repeat it, but a man called me a very unkind name, and yeah, I'm a little upset, or whatever it is. Well, yes, my best friend died, and yes, I am heartbroken. Yes, my brother-in-law cheated me, and I'm a bit miffed. Assuming that people are still miffed anymore. I don't guess he was a real man, or he wouldn't have been miffed. I don't know. But see, when it gets at the very heart of the physical workings of things in a three-dimensional world, such as the human nervous system, to say that one thing grows from another, an ordinary person would say, well, I can see that. But that is not what it is. It's not a sequence. It is not that, well, we all grew up and we were at one time reptilian, and then we became cave-millian, cave-manlian. And then we kind of progressed, and the nervous system really grew, and we got better food and a lot of carbohydrates and started running, and finally our brain took off. And so, yeah, I can see it's a continuum. That's the kind of word they'd probably use. It's a continuum of the nervous system growing, and we went from being lower creatures and below the level of consciousness, and now our brain works. So, yeah, I can see that it's a continual outgrowth, and they cannot. The brain can say that because I can put it in words, and people go, yeah, I can see that. It is not a sequence. It is a coeval event. It is the same. I would suggest that one of the most telling possible examples is still the fact that in a spherical world, not only are there always other latitudes over the horizon, as you damn well know. Right now, if it's 8 o'clock here, it's 7 o'clock somewhere else. And it's only those of a quite limited view, locked into sequential thinking, that says, well, we're ahead of them or we're behind them. It doesn't matter. That's not the point. The point is, you know quite well that if it's 5 o'clock here, it's 7 o'clock somewhere else. If it's Tuesday here even, I shouldn't go any further. You know that coevally there are different time zones. The different time zones are in the nervous system. It is not that you're no longer reptilian. It is not that you're no longer what you were. If you're not, you're nuts. We'll get to that. No. Not that you're nuts, no. You're trying to derive your own cheap humor. We're going to get to that question. No need to take this personally unless you're the kind of person that wants to write and say, I'm a viewer and I have this to say. And if you do, address it to Kyroots. Spelled with a Q. Well, let's pretend that we covered that. But within the same area that we were touching on off and on for the last few nights, having to do with the primary and the secondary, having to do with the collective thinking of man and its necessity, its absolute requirement, how it is indispensable, and how it is yet insufficient for certain singular avocations that a few stragglers here and there might find themselves interested in. That the collective thinking can be represented, if I might remind you in a certain way, sort of like this, that you would say, you generically, bad news, crime statistics, gossip, and health warnings for everyone else. Professional wrestling live at the Met and Pee Wee's Playhouse for moi. I'll ask again, you do get it, right? It's got nothing to do with television, and it's no judgment upon the cultural taste of people. It's why I tried to make it somewhat humorous. It's not that everybody is a dunderhead that watches or is interested in crime statistics and bad news. That is the collectiveness of the human nervous system. It was simply to create a juxtaposition because, back to my rhetorical question, you do get it, right? Right. Well, it amounts to this. You must have, if I may be the doctor, you must have good, restrictive, threatening measures for the health of the collective, which is basically the health of us all. If it's bad enough doing not just mixed, fractured, beat up metaphors, but to go back for days and drag it back in, but here we go. If the car won't run, even a super sharp bushing will never get on the road and be able to do its thing. Which is back to, I guess that was mixed and crushed enough, wasn't it? It is back to it's only those who are in some way probably caught their pecker in the springs of the bunkhouse beds. Well, you know how sheep they want to get up and curse about the ordinary world, about, boy, you know, everything's going to hell out there. Well, you know, those of you that know anything know damn well the world's not going to hell. I mean, anybody who still believes that are my hero. That's who they are. They are. And of course, if we can point out again with no sarcasm, because surely all the sarcastic people have turned on professional wrestling or the news by now. is it takes an especially kind of an unusually progressive, dense person, an extraordinarily excellent example of denseness for anyone to have just any idea of history in the last 20 years, much less the last 8,000 years, or just any insight to really hear that, yes, things are getting worse, which is normal, and for them to go, yes. So it's back to where I was trying to get you to see for a second. All of that is necessary, though, for the collective wisdom out there, and it would only be somebody that would be dense on top of my little crude make-believe example just then. If it was ordinary sarcasm, which it's not, as you know, but if it was, then doubly sarcastic would be for those that would then, if it were true, but they think it is true, that yes, things are getting worse, and it's not my damn fault, says they, because if it was, they couldn't even be a critical, although objective, and properly oriented critic. They couldn't see it if it was not true, right? And so then it's easy. You say, well, what can be done? Or where does the problem lie? Well, they know where it lies. They might say, well, I am honest and sophisticated enough that I will not tell you that I'm a perfect person. I'm still telling for other people now, not me. That I am perhaps not perfect, but at least I recognize the problem. So if you're asking me, I'm still telling for ordinary people. If you're asking me, then I'm going to have to tell you the truth. The problem, I don't want to point fingers specifically, but the problem obviously is, sort of out there. Or if we're going to play pogo, we're all part of the enemy. We all litter, we all treat our fellow man unkindly. Some of us have had the temptation to take off one shoe and throw it out in the road just to drive everybody. That's crazy. How about back to where we were? It would only be somebody doubly dense who would respond to that, yes, out there, the collective, as you call it, the collective is ill, or are ill, if you want to. No. They are healthy. And the very things that you would be ordinarily, from your old view, inclined to find fault with, you should bite el tongo. Because it is the very things that seem to run the collective into fits, guilt, neuroses, whatever the common, most recent secondary maladies may be. That's their health. That was when I started that little diagnosis that let's have good, hard-hitting, restrictive, threatening, guilt-laden measures for everyone. I may have to leave, but count me in. Being pressed as we are, I will take that reaction as proof that some of you are here, heard something. All right, a last call. We'll change metaphors again. Instead of a doctor's diagnosis, let's go to a place that gives alternative treatment, shall we say. Consider we'll have last call and a toast to this one little area. And you could say, everything as it is for everyone else, barkeep, and I believe I'll slip out the back. End of toast. Back to part of what we had already been talking about attention and the fact that it is known that anybody can prove at any particular time that you can be more alert, you can be more thoughtful at any particular time just by saying, hey, I should be more alert. And from there, as we have pointed out, it's for thousands of years, this has raised its intriguing head and turned into all sorts of mystical systems and philosophies, and as always, into another source of condemnation. Well, hey, that just proves that we're all a bunch of peckerheads. It just proves, well, the rest of you, of course, whoever it is saying it. Anybody who would say that, of course, would also meet that Kyrootian level. It was mentioned once about a man who became so dysfunctional that he began to help others. Which I know makes us all sleep a lot easier at night knowing that such men still exist, even in this day and time, and will take time out of their busy illness schedules to help the rest of us. Regarding the question of attention and how a man can operate at a provable, I'm using their views, I'm not saying this, that anybody can prove that right now, at any particular time, I can be more thoughtful, I can be more alert just by saying I should be more alert. And right then I am. So that's their own proof, I'm just repeating what I heard. And well, it's true. But on that basis, and then back to the fact that rather than taking that as being, if you're from the individual revolutionist would-be view, rather than taking that as a condemnation, which is just another way to beat up on yourself, and say, well, that's true. By God, it just shows how stupid I am. And then you're back to that kind of question that the ordinary do not ask themselves, that I was unkind enough to ask for them. Rather than finding that to be threatening, rather than find that to be a source of further emasculation of one's own self, why would you not find that to be almost exhilarating? That Jesus, that's true, and yet look at the world. Look at the photographs we're getting back now of Venus. And look at the fact that there are people darn close to figuring out the shoes on the highway. The full spectrum, the glory of modern technology, and all of us, the Einsteins, the popes, the scientists, everybody is operating at less at any particular time than maximum efficiency. That's frightening. Now, you've got to be triply dunce, if nothing else. Let's see. Time for more fractured metaphors. That'd be like the ordinary being in a car and looking down and seeing, according to the gauge, that you're out of gas. You know, you've been out of gas for hours, and here you are flying along, and to think what a terrible state of affairs this is, but then to realize, am I nuts? We're running on empty. And picking up speed. Back to the fact I was going to ask you to consider in a certain other way. If you can perform your duties on the assembly line of being a human, if you can perform them with only minimal attention and thought, then why do any more than the job demands? Or any more than they'll ever pay you for? Loans, 2 flights up. Well, it's either that or circumcisions, 1 flight down. Why would anyone, this is back to the general question that has been at the basis of all sorts of human speculation, thought, systems, philosophies about the fact that you can be more alert at any particular time. They knew it 5,000 years ago, They know it now. There are people who know it, and there are people out wearing funny suits and chanting and waving candles, or wearing candles and waving funny suits on the basis that we should be making some kind of cohesive, directed effort through drugs, rituals, starvation, overeating, anchovies, indigestion, to make ourselves more alert. When the fact is, you do not have to be more alert. There's the proof, is what the ordinary system can't see. All right, you can be more alert. I buy their story. It's a fact. But to say we've got to be more alert, my question is back to, they couldn't hear this, but I'm asking you now. Why? You can take it rhetorically to start with, especially if you're those of you that can do rhetorical in E flat. But in a minute we're going up to F. It's to ask yourself, all right, even if it be true, why? Why do any more on your regular job, that is, of being a human? Why do more on your job than is necessary, than the job demands, which they, by their own admission, by their own declarations, that is, ordinary secondary thought, we're not as alert as we could be right now. Okay, I bought that. Jesus, how many times do I have to do it? Now I'd have to ask them, which they wouldn't want to hear this. I don't mean that seriously, like they wouldn't want to hear it, they just wouldn't hear it. Of course, I'll get even, I won't tell them. My question was to them, if I were going to question them, and especially point to them. But one man says, I hope you're pointing about loans and not circumcisions. Why do any more if you could? Why do more than the job demands, or, remember I also said, or they will ever pay you for? Because life does not pay overtime for being human. Not at the ordinary level. So why? I assume you've heard the question so we can get to the answer. Because the answer now, we're not talking to the collective, I'm talking to a few people. The answer is always the same. The answer is because that's what a revolutionist does. Kyroots slipped in a piece of it tonight. That anyone who thinks that knowing more has a point misses the point. Can I do these cheap theatrics and run out the last 2 or 3 minutes? All right. It is simply that is what a revolutionist does. I'm not trying to be tricky with words, as you know, and this kind of thing gets translated and kicked around, and it goes through different incarnations, and it normally, in most of you people's lifetime, whether you noticed it or not, would fall under the heading of, at least in the 50s, cheap Bay Area Zen. Nowadays, I don't know what they might be calling it. Anyway, it's just trying to propose confounding questions. It's taking oxymorons to whole new levels of ersatz profundity. That even hurt me. But it is, what I'm referring to is back to my response to my own question, is why would a person do that which life does not require and which life will never pay you for? And the answer, as I put it, was because that, of course now I'm not speaking to the audience, if there was one, or the forum, I'm speaking to those who are particularly interested in this, that the answer is always the same, and the answer is because that's what a revolutionist does, as we've been calling a revolutionist. A few subheadings, and we can, I guess, slip them in at the end of the tape. That's what a revolutionist does, and that's not just cute wordplay. It doesn't tell you anything by itself to say, well, why would somebody do something that has no point? Why does somebody do something that you can't prove is going to do you any good? Why would somebody especially do something that nobody can even tell them what the hell it's about? And then have the nerve to say, well, whatever you think it's about right now, that's not really what it's about. Jesus, give me a break. I know. No, I don't. Not in the sense I was any kind of compassion. Yeah, I know. Remember the relationship between an intellectual revolutionist and compassion. But they have asked me not to use that kind of language on the tape, so at any rate, that's what a revolutionist does, and I was going to say, rather than leave it there, that what a revolutionist does in that sense, he thinks more than he has to. He thinks at times other than the job requires. He thinks from no particular polarized point of view. He would not be thinking either in concert or in conflict with the collective thinking. It's not it. It's just, I'll have to say it, beyond it. Somewhere else. It's not a matter from any ordinary point of view of saying it's better or it's worse, because I've already admitted, or I let Kyroots admit, if you think it has a point, you miss the point. Not that you immediately see it, but as long as you keep looking for the point, just trust me, it'll make you feel a little bit better, maybe. That if you can't see the point, at least realize this, that you're not getting the point yet. So it's not that what would be possible thinking for reason is no longer, or at the present, to twist time, no longer up that way, required by life. That what you're thinking is not in concert, it's not in conflict with the conventional wisdom, with reason, with sanity, because you should be praying, figuratively speaking, for the health of the ordinary. They're not insane, they're not dumb, they're not less than conscious. That's the car that we're all riding in. And if you were going to pray, you should pray for them. You don't have to, I'm just being silly. Yes, the car wouldn't run, it's only my prayers and sometimes my fears that keep life held up. Right, yeah, okay. All right. It's my pleasure, if not honor, to be acquainted with you. So what a revolutionist would think, whatever the hell that would be, I was trying to narrow it down somewhat right at the end. We got anything left on the tape? Yeah. But whatever it would be thinking, the revolutionist would not be thinking in any way that's in concert with or in conflict with. This how to about cover it. I think so. All right. It's not that. A rap. A concise rap then. A revolutionist would simply be giving more attention and thought to whatever is going on the job of being a human, be more thoughtful, more alert than the job would ever require. But let's still leave on a tricky part, a good part. Not for the sake of the job. All the rest of you going to fill in the concluding part of that sentence? Surely you can. But for his own sake. And that may sound as being some sort of, at least, spurious closing illumination. And yet an ordinary mind would still want to grab that. And so that's either insane, if I'm hearing what you said. That's either insane or I'm doing it already. That is, I'm trying to look after my own self. I'm selfish, I'll admit it. I try to look after my own enlightened self-interest. I once read a book on that kind of philosophy, but they don't. It's not even possible, because that still has a point to it. That is still, they are still playing. They're still either dancing in concert with or in conflict with whatever it is they're pointing out. I don't care what it is. The only way that you can think more than you have to, in a sense that, let us say that I'm inferring, to think when you don't have to do all the things secondarily that the job does not require and will not pay you for. The job simply does not demand it. The only way you can do it is not do it for the sake of the job, which an ordinary person cannot, because there's nowhere to stand, there's nowhere to turn to. Why the hell should I do that, even if I understood what you're saying? I'll rest my case.